Well, good morning, and welcome to this presentation on Node.js Internationalization, or Intl, as it's sometimes abbreviated. We'll talk about where we are, and we'll talk about what's next, as much as we can see. I'm Stephen Loomis from the IBM Global Foundation's technology team, and you can get down my URL here, ibm.biz/srloomis, or at srl295 on various social networks, especially GitHub. So who am I? IBM's Global Foundation team. I've been a part of this team for about 20 years. It's a new name, but the team is not. We make sure that IBM has standards-based technologies, processes to handle a global audience. We need to be able to handle customers and users that speak all sorts of languages. I'm IBM's lead for the international components for Unicode, for C and C++. I'm going to just go through some of these rapidly. We'll come back to these and questions and answers as you have later. I also work with Unicode and the CLDR repository, and I'm also the facilitator for the Node.js International Working Group. And we'll dig into that. And we have a new product called Globalization Pipeline on Bluemix, which you can go try that out. It's in beta. So let's talk about Ecma-402. Ecma-262 is the standard that specifies the JavaScript language itself, or ECMAScript. But Ecma-402 is the internationalization extensions, which is distinct from the 262. And what's inside the Ecma-402 came out in 2010 as the first edition. Sorry, 2012 in the first edition. So the BSP47 language tags, in other words, using ENUS to specify English versus FR for French, collation, ordering of which is ordering of text or sorting, number format, being able to handle perhaps a comma for the thousands instead of a period for the thousand separator, and date format in different languages. These are the core features that were in the first edition of Ecma-402. Where can you use that? There's support in Chrome, Firefox, Edge, Opera. Anyone missing there? So WebKit or Safari is a work in progress, and literally as you read this, if you click on the link, you'll find there's further support being done. Second edition of Ecma, after a bit of a hiatus from new editions, editorial changes, and array to locale string. And another major thing, the ECMAScript standards work has moved to GitHub. So you can log in and you can comment on issues, make pull requests for changes to the specification. So that's all great stuff. Let's dig a little bit in to what we mean by internationalization. What is the support that's available in Node.js? We call it Intl because there's a global object called Intl at the top level. And so this is sort of the term for the collective Node.js internationalization content. One of the features is sorting. Intil.collator gives you a linguistic sensitive sort instead of the typical A, B, C, etc., followed by Z, or Z, if you will, but actually supporting different languages collation requirements, the sorting for a particular locale. Date and time format object for dates and times is very flexible in terms of how you output the results. Number formatting. And as well, the Ecma-402 specification also changes a number of other familiar objects. For example, on date, how many of you use date.toString? You have a date, you want to convert it to a string, okay? If instead you call date.toLocaleString, you'll actually output a string that is specific to your user's locale and language. Similarly with the number to locale string. I mentioned collation. Instead of just taking a string and comparing it to another string using greater than or less than, if you call locale compare, you'll get a language, cultural sensitive comparison result with another string. So in this case, we have ABC with A with an accent BC. In English, the A's will sort together. Another important one, which has bitten some people, if we look at the issue tracker on Node.js, is normalize. So, for example, in Unicode, you can specify the, slow down there, scroll bar. Okay, so in Unicode, for example, you can specify U with an umlaut as a single code point, or you can also specify it as a U followed by a combining umlaut. But if you use the normalize function, you can cause those to be the same exact content. Another important function is toLocale upper and lowercase. In Turkish, there is a dotted and upper and lowercase I, and there's a undotted upper and lowercase I. In English and in most other users of Latin, the uppercase I doesn't have a dot, and the lowercase I does have a dot. Whereas in Turkish, those are two distinct groups, the dots and the no dots. This is not implemented in V8, at least the current versions used by Node, but the function's there. So if you need to lowercase something and you're expecting it to go to your user's language, use this appropriately. Okay, let's look at internationalization in Node. Now that we've looked at a brief overview of high-level internationalization in JavaScript. 2012, Ecma-402 was standardized, first edition. Google started a project to support this in V8. 2013, it was integrated into the V8 codebase, and it was available in Chrome pretty early on at that point. 2014, it was a compile option in Node.js, but I don't think very many actually ventured to turn it on. It was a bit complicated, but I worked in some packaging. That's where I started getting involved in Node in the 2013-2014 timeframe. Merged some work into the V12 branch. 2015, February 6th, everyone's excited about .12 getting out the door, right? And the internationalization support was enabled by default in the 0.12 downloads. Now, for space reasons, this only included English by default as far as content. That's to avoid some sticker shock when you go to download and Node is twice as big as it used to be. So, but the point is that the API is there. Download it, use it. You can use these functions I mentioned. IOJS did not pick up this work between 1.0 and 3.0.x. However, it happily reappeared in 3.1 and in subsequent versions. One current project is working on the data packaging that I mentioned. I have an experimental NPM module here and also an issue open 3460 looking at how to improve the situation in terms of getting those other languages. So Node download is about 25 megabytes when you go download Node. And from an international perspective, that gives you English support. But there are other languages besides English. And so if you download the data package needed, that adds an additional 25 megabytes or so of disk content. So 50 megabytes total, and you've got a pretty complete set of the languages that we have support for, several hundred locales. So what does the Node stack look like? What are the components that go into making up this internationalization? Well, at the top we have Node, and you are here. Now we could actually put libraries on top of this, such as the jQuery globalize and other libraries, Moment.js. But we'll start with the basic Node support here and say you are here. Under that we have V8, which we all know or know and love. as the case may be. Know and love. ICU is the International Components for Unicode. It's an open source library I work on, and it implements the Unicode and formatting functions. ICU is used very widely, and it's what is used by V8 itself to do this support. Underneath that, there's a project called the CLDR. And the CLDR is the Unicode Common Locale Data Repository. And this is where the data comes from to say that February is spelled Febrar, or however you would spell it in a particular language. Or Dicembre for December in this current month. So this is quite an extensive project to collect data from hundreds of users, hundreds of thousands of votes every year go into that. Someday, hopefully, it'll be a Node app, but not today. So that gives you an idea of the stack that implements the internationalization in Node. Different areas of responsibility, and if there's an issue, it might be something at any level of these stacks. Let's talk about the international work group. We had some good shout outs on the working groups yesterday at the keynotes, and I'm the facilitator of one called the Intil working group. We named it Intil to distinguish it from the I18N groups. If you're not familiar with the time frame on this, at the time of the IOJS fork, a couple dozen language-specific groups started up, almost overnight. I think some of them were literally overnight. And that's great. It's a great community, and they're working on individual language support. They're working on outreach in these different languages, different regions of the world. It's all great stuff. The Intil working group is not focused on specific language translation, but instead it is looking at internationalization as a more general topic. Had our first meeting in August of this year, and our scope is compliance and functional support. We have the editor of Ecma-402, Carity Patino, on as a regular contributor to this project, and also to do triaging of any international issues that come up in the Node issue base. So if you see an issue that's tagged Intl, we'll try to pick those up. Also, we want to provide guidance and best practices for users. And we want to take the implementation and make it even better, what's there. So how do you get started using the Node international support? Well, first, download Node.12 or later. Of course, you'd probably want to use the 4.2 LTS, or perhaps 5 if you want some of the bleeding edge latest features. Use to-locale string instead of toString on your numbers and dates. If you're doing something that's facing an end user, you want to use to-locale string. And this applies to front-end JavaScript as well. If you have these functions available, make use of those. Use locale compare instead of less than or greater than. This will give you something that supports more than just ASCII and code point order. And a great resource for learning about the standards compliant internationalization is the Mozilla Developer Network and page on international. And by the way, the slides are at my ibm.biz address, and I'll give that back to you. So what's next for 402? As I mentioned, it's on GitHub. You can view those issues and comment there or open something new. Third edition perhaps will be out in 2016. That's the current plan. There are a number of possible features for either the near or the further term. Some of them are the plural rules, being able to tell if you have one file, or if you have two files, if you have three files, you have no files, rather than using the parenthesized S to kind of cover your bases. It seems a little weaselly even in English. And the logic for doing that can be more complicated. Languages such as Arabic and Welsh have 6 different cases for plurals. So this feature is just to get the rules in place, to know which type of breakdown you have. So, and some other features, getting locale services out there, Unicode data. The focus on Ecma-402 is really to provide features to enable library developers, framework developers to add more international features on top. What's next for the Intil workgroup? We want to improve the documentation around internationalization. We want to take some of the comments from this presentation, some of the best practices, and get those out in front of users. We want to make it easier to locate full ICU support so that English only might end up being a checkbox or just a package option, your favorite packager. And to localize Node itself, make it easier to localize modules, and reach out to the user communities to make them aware of the support. So thanks, and we can take a couple minutes for Q&A. You can write down the my IBM Biz URL, and you can find slides there. Any questions? Yes?
You mentioned something about regex support.
Certainly. So the question is regex. Can I go into the regex support? Yeah. So currently the JavaScript regex supports really ASCII classes, and it doesn't actually even support Unicode supplementary characters yet currently, even in the V8, and it especially doesn't support Unicode character classes. So if you say match anything that's a word or a letter, it's only going to work with things that are English words. See heads nodding. People have hit this before. There's work around trying to improve that. I don't know the exact status of that, but that's a work in progress. I say jump over to the GitHub repos, especially the Ecma-402 has that as its purview. And we can jump in and talk about that one. So, great question. Any other questions? Yes?
What's the plan for pluralization in terms of like what format you guys are looking into? I know there's a variety of them out there that plans, so I'm just curious what you guys are trying to do from that.
Yeah, great question. The question was pluralization. What format is this going to end up? This is actually just a low-level support. This is support that says you're in Arabic, you have two. You pass in the integer 2. Which of the enumerated classes does it fall into? Does it fall into the 0, the 1, the few, the many, sort of dual form, plural form, etc. So it's just kind of the classification. So it's something that you could build something on top of it using any of these other formats. And that is the general trend for the new Ecma-402 features, is to provide things that you can build important features on top of. The first edition was very high level, date, format this date. That's something that's going to be very user visible. And this is now sort of plumbing, things that are hard to do. Unicode properties, for example. It can be polyfilled, it's been done, but it's painful, a lot of data. Any other questions? A couple minutes for questions here. Yeah, good question. How does Node know which language you're using? So your operating system will give its default language. This one happens to be in Spanish and English. So if I just type date from the command line, oh, actually, I guess I don't have my command line set to Spanish. But anyway, if your depending on what the parameters were set, if your operating system has a default language that's visible to Node, but actually Mac from the command line will not necessarily do that. But you can influence it with environment variables. So if you say all equals es us node test. Okay, so there we go. So there you can see I have the Spanish. As I mentioned, I need to load the ICU data, which is a separate topic. But here's our formatting in German or Spanish. You can, if you look at the Mozilla documentation, you can specify which locale you're referring to. But otherwise, it will pick up the default, whatever default your command line would have. Yes, sorry. Yeah, you can specify. Right. And that's our time. Thank you. You can contact me afterwards. Give you more details. Slides are up, ibm.biz/srloomis.